Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This week a viewer reached out to me about recreating one of the iconic tombstones from the Haunted Mansion Cemetery. And me being me, I'd gladly accepted. So let's get to the build. First off, I've imported a photo of the tombstone into Adobe Illustrator and have determined what the overall dimensions of the piece are based on my client's request. Once I've done that, I can create a grid which will help me to figure out how big the epitaph text needs to be. After a quick outline of the tombstone shape and manually tracing the epitaph, I'm going to export the epitaph in sections that will fit on my vinyl cutter, and will cut some stencils to help make the carving process go faster. My vinyl cutter has a maximum width of 12 inches, so I had to turn part of the epitaph to make it fit. The rest of it could be cut out normally. Now that I've got my stencils cut, I'm going back into Illustrator, and with the artboard set to the actual dimensions of the tombstone, I'm going to print out a pattern using the Tile Fill Pages option in the printer dialog box. This will automatically cut up the image into multiple sheets, which can then be taped together to create my pattern. With my prints all done, it's time to tape them all together to make the pattern. Off camera, I glued two 2-inch sheets of foam together to get the correct thickness for this tombstone. I'll place the pattern onto the foam and trace the outline before cutting the straight edges with my pull saw and the curved sections with my hot wire tool. A bit of sanding to smooth out the edges, and then it's time to work on the base. I realized after cutting out the shape of the pattern that I needed to remove the wings off the bottom and instead would apply a 1-inch foam base. So I measured out the height using my reference print and marked it with a ruler. I also use this as an opportunity to lay out some of the guidelines for my stencils, but that will have to wait until after I've added on the base. I grabbed my hot wire table and set the guide fence to 7 inches, and then cut down my foam and added a slight bevel to the top edge with my sander. Then it was time to measure, cut, and glue the base onto the tombstone. As always, I'm using Gorilla Glue to bond the foam pieces together by wetting the surfaces, applying glue, and then using a weight or skewers to hold the pieces together while they dry. I like to cut slightly larger than I need, so once the pieces had dried, I can grab my orbital sander to blend the edges perfectly flat. A bit of hand sanding to get into the areas I couldn't reach with the palm sander, and then it's time to apply the stencils. The first thing I'll need to do is to apply transfer tape to the stencils so that I can peel them off the backing with all of the cut pieces intact. This can be tricky if parts of your stencil won't easily release from the backing paper. Thankfully, you can use your fingernail to encourage them. Because I marked off my guidelines, it's much easier to ensure that my epitaph is perfectly horizontal. I'm also keeping my reference image nearby just to be safe. For the name, I find it easier to invert the tombstone so that I'm looking at the shape and its relation to the tombstone rather than the epitaph as a whole. Once I've got all the stencils applied and have cut off any overlapping stencil material, it's time to dust the surface of the tombstone with some spray paint. You'll want to do this from a distance to prevent the spray paint solvents from melting the foam. When I've got all the lettering in the stencil painted, it's time to remove the stencil and expose the epitaph below, and we can get to carving. As usual, I'm using my Dremel rotary tool with the 194-bit. I've modified the router cup attachment with a piece of acrylic to create a wider base so that as I pass over large areas, the tool won't dip into the carved space and cause uneven lettering. This part takes time, but your patience will be rewarded. With the epitaph carved, it's time for some prep work before I can move on to painting. I like to use a fast-drying caulk to fill in any gaps or voids in the foam. This particular brand can be painted, so make sure whatever type you're using can be too. Now that we've done all our carving, gluing, and prep work, we can move on to paint. The client I'm making this for had other Haunted Mansion replica tombstones in their collection, and asked that this one's paint job match their existing tombstones. So I'll skip the dry lock coat that I typically do, and we'll jump right into blacking out the epitaph with my airbrush. I'll start with the tombstone right side up, and then we'll flip it upside down to make sure I've got good overall coverage. Off camera, I painted the rest of the tombstone black, and now it's time to grab some white acrylic paint, a damp sea sponge, and my paint tray, and I'm going to apply a granite-like finish to the whole piece, being sure to blot some of the paint off the sponge to keep the application from going on too heavy. This can take some time, and it's important to remember to turn the sponge and flip it over so that you don't create any patterns in your finish. I like to rinse out my sponge along the way when I see that the paint is starting to go on in more dense blotches. Removing the soaked-in paint will help give the sponge back some of its texture. Plus, the extra moisture will help with blending your paint. After covering the entire tombstone, it's time to blend the texture created by the sea sponge by applying a bit of gray acrylic, thinned out with window cleaner and applied with the airbrush. I'm looking to minimize the drastic contrast between the black and white paints, which I could have done with the sea sponge, but the airbrush will make quick time of it. Once I was happy with the look, it was time for some beauty shots. Well, there you have it. One Haunted Mansion Master Gracey tombstone replica. Be sure to check out our other video to see our more in-depth tutorial on how we make tombstones. And be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.